those are actually what I wanted to do is talk just a minute about how you start this if you're not already doing it. I think giving you some advice and some direction there would be helpful. Otherwise, I've finished the content of what we're going to talk about. Are there questions about things that you've seen or content-related things? Because I'll talk a little bit about how I see people kind of getting this thing started and rolling with it. So there are a couple pieces to it. It used to be back when we only had Planning Workbench. You basically kind of walk through MRP and go through a regular MRP kind of implementation, which you will want to do. But today, you could go and load the calendar and just bring up the calendar and just start visualizing what you're making. All we're doing is changing dates. That's all that's happening. The plan start and end date is all that's really changing. So you're not going to hurt anything. You can't delete a batch from the calendar, etc. So start playing with it. Just get in there and give it a shot. Now, to the meat of what we're really talking about, and that's the MRP piece. There's a couple pieces to it just to know that exist. Currently in V2, the regen still resides in V2. Seth, have you made a decision yet whether that's coming in June?
It's scheduled for June.
Okay. So honestly, there isn't much to the screen because it's all happening on the server. But this screen refreshes as it happens. I can do it, but it's going to run really fast because I don't have that much data, which is good. So it just runs. There's also a time element associated with it that you can run at a certain time of day. This screen in V2 can run outside of the V2 menu. The reason that's important is you could leave it up on your machine without having all V2 open. Just have that screen open in your toolbar, and it would just watch for that time and fire off MRP. And so what it does is it processes and finished. There are two parts to it. There's a regenerate low-level codes, and then there's also a generate MRP. Regenerate low-level codes is all about trying to find the fastest path to process through your data. We don't want to have to go through this process more than once. We only want to touch an inventory item one time. We only want to do this analysis of supply and demand and planned orders one time. So you got to figure out what is the path in which you do that. And so there is a tool that runs that optimizes that thread so that you're only touching a single item only once. Okay. It's called regenerate low-level codes. The only time you only have to run low-level codes is when you change the formula or change the relationship between an item and a formula. Some people find MRP runs so fast they just go ahead and regenerate low-level codes all the time.
Is this going to be faster in 4, like the create batches?
I don't know that it would change, would it?
Initially, probably not, just because probably not. There's still the processing side of this initially will not change.
So this screen will reside in a V4 interface of some sort, so be watching for that. Now, so the first thing you do is regenerate MRP and actually technically regen low-level codes. If you've never done it before, it is possible that you'll get what's referred to as recursion. In other words, if you've got an ingredient that's included in the same ingredient, it can get into a scenario where it gets in an infinite loop, where it says, I use it, but I also make it the same way, and it can't figure out how to get out. That's the first thing you have to solve is give us a call. We'll walk you through the scenario and help you identify where you've got those scenarios, and then you can fix them. There are ways that can be handled, but that's the first thing to do is to deal with your recursion, if you have any. Then after that, MRP will run and it will give you those results. What you would do next is go into the planning workbench and see the results and see if it starts making any sense. Chances are it won't. I mean, the odds are good that it's not going to make sense initially. It's not going to make sense initially for a couple of reasons. It's all based on data. It's all based on the most likely scenario that we see, the most common scenario we see is old sales orders or old purchase orders. Because if people weren't looking at MRP, there would be no reason to worry about, I've got an old sales order. Everybody knows I'm not going to ship that. Don't worry about it. Well, MRP doesn't know that. It thinks you're going to ship it. So the worst thing you could do is fire up MRP and start buying or making off of it. Because it's most likely going to be wrong. Not because the code is wrong, but because there's old data. So one of the things you will find, probably one of the first things you could do when you go in is just run a list in Dynamics What are my open sales orders, my open POs, and are they reasonable and are they real? Yeah, they might be open, but the dates might be old. Whereas we know they're in order, but it says January, we know that it's not going to be till August. Well, tell the system it's going to be August, because it thinks you need it in January. So that's for purchase orders and sale orders. That is the first low I need for it to go deal. Because it'll go pick it up and it'll say, hey, you need to make it back in January. So what starting to work with MRP is about is starting to go through some of the data and see if it starts making sense to you. The scheduler, whoever that is in the organization, has a gut feel for what needs to be made and when it needs to be made. And I think when you first start trusting that gut initially and challenge why does the schedule say this when your gut tells you this, or your manual scheduling system says something differently. And start picking a few items that are fairly easy to schedule. Don't try to do all of it at once, or don't, MRP will run for everything that you've got trying to run with MRP. It will run for everything, but just focus your attention on just a handful of items or a certain type of item, one that you can easily get your hands around. Don't get crazy with multiple layers and keep it simple, get that under control, make sure it's okay. What that will do is drive out data problems. It will allow you to start setting up things like lead times and safety stocks. Both purchase lead times and safety stocks are in Dynamics. Manufacturing lead times are in Vicinity. And start playing around with that. As the system starts to settle in a little bit and the data is starting to make some sense to you, the next thing you want to start thinking about is reporting and how you want to see that data. We talk mostly about visual tool, whether it be drag and drop or firming an order, et cetera, using the screen. But there's an entire group of people out there outside of the scheduler that wants to see this data that you don't want in the screen. You don't want them dragging and dropping your schedule, et cetera. So you're probably going to want to get to a place where there's a report or something presented to them, et cetera. So once the data starts to settle a little bit, change your view and start looking at reporting how you want to communicate this to other people. Our view is that eventually this visual calendar will make its way to a Google Calendar or something like that. That makes good sense from our perspective. How we get there, we're not quite sure at this moment, but that makes good sense. But I think in the short run, a report, we've already given you 3 off the planning workbench. Take a look at those. We're happy to tweak them with you to make them look the way you want it to look. But I would start there and start working from there. Tomorrow, there are some folks that will be in focus that have been very successful in rolling out and implementing planning workbench, and not necessarily a calendar because that's relatively new, planning workbench work. I would recommend kind of hooking up with them. I'll try to remember to ask for just kind of quick show of hands of who's willing to talk about it. Most people that are successful in it are very willing to talk about it. But it is definitely an iterative approach, and that is run it, see what you get. Kind of clear those rocks. In other words, get rid of the old sales orders, change the dates, do all that, clean up your data, run it again, see what you get. And you continue that process, and eventually you're going to find that it starts mirroring what you would do. It probably will never be perfect, because that's why the scheduler has a job. The scheduler will always be making decisions that the system doesn't understand, and the cost associated with trying to teach the system is probably prohibitive. So get 80% of it the way you want, and then use the tool to kind of set it the way you want. So set realistic expectations for you and for the scheduler, for procurement, and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of my advice on it. It is the way we normally work with clients, just to let you know if you want us to be a part of this, is we can engage in a couple of sessions. And so we go through the MRP regeneration, kind of help you with any recursion and help you find that and get you. Typically what we'll find is, here's a scenario, and you'll look at it and go, oh yeah, that's this type of product. And now you'll go running and you go fix that kind of stuff. There might be 5 or 10 formulas that you got to kind of clean some things up. You come back and you look at it again. All right, recursion's gone. Now, oh my God, everything's loaded up on past due. Why is it creating all these plan orders? When you go to the transactional MRP, you see all these sales orders. You go, oh, okay, yep, I can see I got all these sales orders.
I'm forecasting.
I'll be back. And you come back and you'll work with it. And then we get there to another session, and that's kind of done. And now we're down to kind of blocking and tackling. Now we're down to what kind of safety stocks, what kind of lot sizes, what kind of lead times, and how do we work with that. Once you've gone through 2 or 3 in total kind of sessions, now we're kind of in that place where you understand the tool, it's working with data for you, then we start talking about reports, what kind of information would help you. Whole process is probably 30 days, something like that.